Hi friends, it's Benjamin here with another COVID contemplation. These are unscripted and unedited musings where I talk about what's on my mind while I am fighting COVID. These are kind of raw, probably a little bit of rambling going on because you're not feeling 100%. Sometimes that happens. So what's on my mind today? Well, in the previous video I talked a little bit about new mysticism and kind of the problem of this hyper-individualism that exists within it. And I've been thinking a bit about why we go to church. My dad and a bunch of his brothers, they grew up in a very hyper-fundamentalist church. It was very hellfire, damnation, and you went to church partly to avoid burning for all eternity, because you were supposed to go to church. You go to church to worship God, and if you don't go to church, you're disobedient and probably going to burn. So it's no surprise that when they were able to get out on their own, they stopped going. And I know my dad, he has gotten back into church off and on over the years. Some of his siblings have as well. But I know I've heard from some of those that haven't had any interest in that, and also from other people I've spoken to over the years, that there's some ideas out there that where people argue against going to church, see no reason for it. Like one of the big ones is, well, I can worship God better on my own. I don't need to get up and go sit in church and hear somebody preach to me to be able to worship. And many argue especially that, I experience God better out in nature. I can do that by myself. Or for a few, well, I, experience God more in my small group than I do at church. And, I don't doubt that for many, a lot of that's very true. I know for me, a lot of times my experience of intimacy with God has sometimes been greater in my own private devotions than what I've experienced in going to some churches. And I think that's a normal thing for some of us at different points in our Christian walk. But here's the issue. We don't go to church just so we can experience God individually. We don't go to church just to be able to worship God individually. That's not the focus. Yes, we can worship God anywhere. And since He has promised to be with us, we can experience Him anywhere. Instead, we go to church not for our own individual needs, but because we experience God collectively as well, and in ways that are different from how we experience Him individually. Now, one problem is that not every church does a good job of facilitating that experience, if you will. Very often our experience in church is not that great. That is true. And that's actually a tragedy. God is exciting. He is infinitely creative. But our churches often fail to reveal that. So, if we go to church and it's very dry, yeah, I can understand why people don't want to experience that. But, look at Jesus' own promise that where two or more are gathered in His name, He is there in the midst of them. Our worship, when we come together, should acknowledge that and invite us to respond. It is a special thing. But it's more than that. This is also a time of equipping. When we come to church together, it is so we can grow, not just individually, but as a body. And I believe a lot of our church services don't really acknowledge that. But then, I also have to wonder, though, when it comes to the shortcomings in our church services, how much of that is rooted in the problem of our own hearts as we go into worship. together as a body. Because so very often, pastors will deal with this. The people in their congregation, they are there, they have a time limit, and they are ready to go. If that's the case, is what we are doing when we show up really our priority? If we show up to church and we are mostly focused on hurry up and getting out so we can get to lunch and then get home in time for the start of the game, then maybe the problem is really our heart at that moment. That our heart's not invested in what's happening. I'm amazed when I hear how in some cultures the Christians come together and they worship together, they disciple together for hours on Sunday. It can be a whole day event when they come together. And I have to think that, especially in Western society, our attention spans just don't allow that. And that's really sad. If you look at the amount of time most of us are consuming some sort of media, TV shows, things like that, whether online or on TV, and compare that to the amount of time we're spending together as a body in worship, in discipleship, growing together as followers of Christ, it really doesn't compare. And then we wonder why it seems like we're not getting anything out of it. Well, we're not putting anything into it either. So that can be part of the problem. But when we have a hyper-individualistic focus as well, where, okay, I go to church for me, then already we're going to have a problem there too. Because our going to church should not be for me, it should be about Him. It's about coming together so we can celebrate Him together. Why? Because He created us to be an us, not just me to be me. Yes, He created me to be me, He created you to be you, but He also created us to be us. A body of believers. And I've seen this so many times over the years too, and that's that when believers cut themselves off from the body, invariably it does lead to a spiritual decline. They may think they're better believers independent of the body. That's never really the case, because we need each other. He created us to minister to one another, and we have to have that. And when we cut ourselves off from that, we are closing off channels through which He would minister to us. But it takes humility to let that happen. I have to acknowledge that I have limitations where I can't meet all my own needs, and that He wants to meet my needs through other followers of Christ. So I know with the pandemic, many people have not been going to church and have been doing church online. That's the best we can do, that's the best we can do, but before too long, it's going to be really important for us to come together. I've got a feeling that with the way things seem to be going in the world, our need for one another is only going to be increasing in the coming months and years ahead. And I hope we don't have to ever face the situation of trying to come together secretly out of fear of persecution. But I do know that if we can't come together when we are free to do so, how on earth are we going to do if it actually becomes prohibited for believers to come together to fellowship, worship, and grow together as followers of Christ? Yeah, probably not going to happen. Some of the persecuted countries, they've seen that. that when the persecution started, lots of people just stopped. And it was then when you got the people that were willing to come, even at risk to themselves, that you really saw the church, strangely enough, flourish. I just hope it doesn't take that. I hope instead that we can have our own change of heart to where we will rejoice in being able to come together and worship Him and grow together as His people. Anyway, that's just something on my mind. I hope I was going well with everybody. As always, discussion down below. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. And yeah, let's pray we will be the people who don't forsake the coming together, but instead rejoice in fellowship with one another. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.